I'd like to bring up on stage our next panelists. And now we're going to be looking at AI-driven personalization. So marketing to the individual at scale. Now, we heard earlier from Kylan Gibbs talking about the technical difficulties of making that happen. But now let's look at the upside when you can make that happen and what kind of benefits that brings. So we're going to have coming out Eric Koziol from Bain. We're going to have Michael Misevich at Yext. We'll have Jen Rapp with Superside, and Wilfrid Obeng, CTO of Audiomob. And then guiding this ragtag assembly through the conversation will be Jeremy Goldman, returning to the stage today from eMarketer. So please give it up for our panel.
Hello, everybody. Great to be with you for yet another panel. I'm really excited for this one. This is a conversation I would easily have with the four of you all, even if we weren't on a stage. But maybe just very quickly, for everybody who's not familiar with your work, and Eric, we could start with you and go down, just give people the high-level spiel about your involvement in personalization and life story, but 60 seconds.
I'm Eric Koziel. I've been doing AI machine learning for about 15 years now. I'm currently an expert associate partner at Bain, where I've done a lot of personalization projects, typically impacting clients 9 figures for various like ad optimization, coupon optimization. I was previously head of AI for a company called Brandguard, where we built an automated marketing engine. And from there, we built a way to verify content to see if it was on brand. And I also write a Substack called Embracing Enigmas, where one of the top posts is about hyper-personalization.
My name's Michael. I'm the head of data and AI at Yext. Yext is a company that makes software that helps you manage your online digital presence. And we help with everything from social media to reviews to SEO to pages, and now a lot with generative search experiences. Prior to that, I worked at a company called AppNexus, which was in the ad tech space. And my background is computer science and neuroscience.
Yeah, I'm Jen Rapp. I'm CMO of a company called Superside. I am definitely the least smart person on the stage today, so you're going to have to bear with me. I come from a consumer marketing background. I spent 10 years at Patagonia, went and ran marketing at DoorDash, helped Klaviyo, very much into hyper-personalization, go through their IPO, and now I'm here at Superside, helping to run marketing.
Cool, and my name is Wilfrid Obeng. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Audiomob. Basically, we allow game developers to monetize their games without interrupting the user using audio rather than a video. So if anyone's ever played a game and been completely frustrated, we're helping to cure that experience. Previously, I was at Google and Goldman Sachs for around 4 years.
So, OK, let's jump right into it. I feel like personalization has been this really exciting thing for years. Everybody, every brand that I ever speak to is not as far along as they say that they are, but they have promise of doing really great things in the future. How far along would you all say that we are when we're trying to think about like true one-to-one personalization, where we're just speaking to a customer at the level where they're like, wow, they see me, they really see me. Like, is that a 2026 thing, or 2035, or never?
I think we're there right now for the first-party data, for the customers you have access to. In terms of targeting, that's really controlled by your ad buying platforms and how personalized you can get. I don't know if that's what you're seeing, Wilfrid.
Yeah, so I think on our side, I agree with you. I think I'd say we're like 90% of the way there in terms of what the voice models now sound like. It's actually pretty impressive, to be honest, to say the least. But I do think there are certain intonations in people's voices, certain accents that we aren't necessarily got 100% right. But I think if you're talking about a time frame, I'd say, yes, by 2026, we're going to be hearing models that are very, even more high fidelity than they are. And we've heard from even 11 Labs earlier around some of the stuff they're doing also in audio. So I'll definitely say that we are progressing in a way that is very fast. And I think that also presents some great examples and some great applications. For example, being able to translate audio into multiple different languages in countries where there's multiple dialects being spoken or multiple languages being spoken. To give like India, for example, Belgium, for example, even the United States, for example. So I think there is a lot of positives, but then there's also worries about obviously how these voice models are also being used, right? And that's the reason why you've seen a lot of LLMs not wanting to release some of these models too prematurely.
I'd say we're 75% of the way there. And certain industries are definitely ahead of the curve. Like I would say beauty industry is way ahead of the curve in terms of being able to understand your tastes and your preferences and speak directly to you. Then I would say like B2B, where I live today, we're slightly behind the curve, and we're not. We haven't totally been able to take AI and ML and all of those great things that where you're selling a very physical product, you're able to use and personalize. We're speaking to people at the segment level more than the individual level, and I think we've got a way to go.
I'm going to agree that we have a long way to go still. And I think one of the really interesting things to ponder is how much information is there when you're having a touch point with a customer? Like on an extreme end, you can imagine like a bus ad. Like you know nothing about the person who sees it, you know nothing about them. There's like really no targeting you can do. On the other end of it, you might have like you've had a relationship with this customer for 20 years, you have lots and lots of notes. And in that area, like you could do something really powerful with like retrieval augmented generation, where you could take every phone call you've ever had with a customer, feed it into a long context window LLM, and then have the system say, okay, this person is calling about this. Here are the last 3 things they called about. This is what's important to them. Maybe even reach them on a much more emotional level. And my opinion, I don't think anyone is doing that at this point in time, and it's a big opportunity. And it's something that you really couldn't have done until now, because that is something you would need to hire. You know, prior to 2020, you would have needed to hire like an intern to read through all those files and write those reports for you. But now, you just do it, because summarization is something these LLMs are really good at. So I see that as a huge opportunity for customer service. Now, how does that relate to marketing is an interesting, debatable question. But
so Michael, there's something that you said, I think, backstage that I thought was really interesting, which is that I think that, just to summarize almost, like the average consumer is so much more aware of the power of personalization. They're interacting with the like ChatGPT and the like, and creating very personalized experiences. So in some ways, I think that that's almost creating awareness for the fact that personalization is so valuable.
I think that is such a big can of worms that is totally open-ended at this point in time, because people are going, and I'm sure everyone in this room does it. I know my friends do it. They'll go on ChatGPT and ask it just sort of subjective questions. And if you're a marketer, you need to be thinking about like, well, how am I going to be showing up in these models? And it's a very challenging problem because of the fact that it's a secret recipe like Coke or whatever. They're not going to say how they're training them. They're not going to say what goes into the training data. But if you can measure how you're showing up in some of them, then that can give you some clues that, hey, maybe I'm not writing enough about myself. There's not enough like raw materials for these models to learn from. And so there's this whole new thing. It's like kind of related to how SEO was 20 years ago, but it's also now it's all different, but it's the same, you know? And how that is all going to unfold is like, that's a great question.
Yeah,
Find out.
We know personalization works. I mean, the campaigns I've worked on that done personalization can like 50% increase in lift easily from doing it. But you're talking about like zero-touch marketing, right? We don't even have access to the customers, so how can you do any personalization at all, right? So channels die, we know this, and so it feels like you're moving towards an era of influence, of trying to influence the LLMs, and how can you change your content so that it's there? I think we'll probably see some sort of ad buying set up in the LLMs, in the chat providers eventually. That's going to allow you to change or influence the language that goes to individuals as they see it.
How about, and I think that this is, to me, like one of the most interesting things, is that the consumer is increasing their awareness of the value of personalization, right? They're also increasingly aware of the fact that they are the product to some degree, and their data is being monetized, it's being used. So, Jen, maybe this is a good person to, not we don't put the least intelligent person in the middle, by the way. Just, but I think that one of the key things here is that there's a certain like invasive or creepy factor that personalization can go into.
Yeah.
So how, if you're a marketer, do balance that and kind of like stay abreast of the fact that something might have been weird or creepy to personalize off of a few years ago, but now the customer is increasingly used to the fact and expecting it.
Yeah, it's table stakes, really. Like, personalized marketing is table stakes. And the best personalization is when you feel talked to, not targeted. And when the company you're potentially buying from or engaging with is serving you content or promos or anything at all that is based on information that is, one, either publicly available or that you've provided to the brand or that your search history has shown them you might have interest in, that makes a consumer happy. Like, we literally at Klaviyo had a campaign once where it was like, talk to someone, don't target them. And it's really so true. Like, speak to them about their interests, and it gets a lot less creepy.
Yeah. I think with chatbots, I don't think they've really hit the mark necessarily, because most of the time when you go to a chatbot to interact with a brand for like support or something, you're going there to say, hey, I have a problem. And for me, it's always like something is happening. There's an exception. My thing got lost. It's not working. I need someone to do something that they wouldn't normally do because a problem is happening that's not supposed to be. And the chatbots are like, well, our opening hours are like 9 to 5 or whatever. And I'm like, to me, that feels, for me, that's annoying, but it could also be creepy because like you can sense that there's a transaction taking place here and I'm not on the right side of it, right?
Yes.
It's not working for me. It's working for someone else's interest. And it's frustrating to creepy somewhere in that area for me.
I think I definitely agree with what you both said, and I agree with exactly what Jen said. I think it's really, really important, and I think as a UK, we started in the UK where we had to abide by GDPR law, and I think the borderline between creepy and context is very close. But I think when you don't necessarily need all of that user information, that user data, we don't need to have exactly your phone GID to know exactly where you are and what you're doing. We've seen that just using the context to exactly what Jen is saying, you're able to communicate to someone in a practical one-to-one level by saying, like, for example, personalizing the language to the phone's device language, personalizing things like to what game or app they're using. So using that context of where they are, their location, changing language, also time of day, all of this kind of information that you already have that isn't necessarily super hyper-personalized is enough actually to deliver a story and deliver a message and deliver a brand recognition that we haven't had to go and start looking at people's device IDs and doing super hyper-personalized targeting. And I think that's where it gets really creepy, where people are like, I was looking at Jordan sneakers yesterday and now I'm getting talked to, or I was having this conversation and then now I'm getting targeted with all of these ads. And I think that's where people get really weirded out about, like, where is my data being used and how it's being used. But I think what we've seen is you can get to a high degree of accuracy with just context without having to go into such a granular sphere.
And I think the context thing brings up something really important, which is that the demand for personalization is going to be different depending on what industry you're talking about, right? And also, B2B versus B2C, for instance, even. Like, that's something where the different contextual cues that you're going to leverage in order to personalize, I imagine, would be different. And I imagine even like when you saw that, when you moved from B2C to B2B, right, Jen?
Absolutely. And I see it today with all of Superside's customers, because we serve everyone from like a Coca-Cola to a Reddit to a Meta, and they all have very varying appetites for AI in their creative and the level of personalization in their creative. And so some of them, won't name names, but some of them say like hard no on any AI personalization, like full no. And others are like, hey, let's get as cool and granular as possible, and like what potential flavors or what new colors would they like. And it's fun being on this side where we're also helping marketers market with AI today and really seeing like different brands' taste and preferences for personalization and the comfort around it.
Jen, are you seeing more improved performance on the consumer side just because you have more data and transactions as opposed to B2B?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. You just have a different volume, like with beauty or TikTok or consumer goods. It's not like a B2B transaction where you're like building pipeline.
But it does actually, Eric, raise a really interesting question, which is like in the future, like the role of a marketer is naturally going to change. There are going to be certain things that a marketer will be tasked with doing that they weren't previously doing, right? And then there might be certain things like making creative decisions where if you're, let's say, given the data that one personalized campaign that optimizes creative and uses a particular message is just going to deliver better results, then you're going to be hard pressed as the marketer to say, yeah, but like I really want to go with this other one because it looks cool. I mean, that type of marketer doesn't seem like they're going to fly anymore in this paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously data-based decisions is really, really good, and you can feed your algorithms to kind of help do it well, but a human orchestrator, I think, is a really good strategic way to apply these AI tools to really personalize what's happening.
Agree, disagree?
It's an interesting question. I mean, there's always going to be a little bit of like art to it, and I don't think you can have all one or the other necessarily. Like you still need like that, maybe like a creative vision that kind of isn't coming from data necessarily, and that's maybe a bit of an odd thing for me to say as a data scientist, but I honestly think it's the truth, is that everyone remembers like the Apple 1984 ad, for example, and they're certainly at that time, all right, that's a bad example because there was no data really back then, but that's probably not something where you could a priori know that this is what I should do, but you just run with it. But then there's going to be other times where it's like, okay, here's the data, here's the analysis, let's get very focused on this, and I think choosing the right mix is a really big part of the problem, and it's going to change a lot too, because like now we have the ability to process data in ways that we never did before. So maybe if you say it should be 70-30 today, maybe it's going to be 80-20 in 5 years or something like that, or whatever.
It's a good point, but I think that the whole challenge, obviously, if you're going to be continually data-driven, is that does that take decisions away from a marketer if, like, let's just say they keep personalizing and optimizing over and over and over to ad nauseum so that every single creative looks exactly the same.
I just don't think we live in a world where that's going to happen, to be really honest.
I would hope. Yeah.
I would hope, but I just don't. I mean, marketers are really smart people. Sale pitch for marketers. But we know what works. And we have hundreds of years of human awareness and knowledge and humor and culture that like tell us when something is going to work that AI might not have. Like one example would be the brat summer. Like bright green, weird flippin' trend that I didn't understand at all. Like, and AI couldn't have predicted that, but some human somewhere said like, there's something cool here, and that human genius just can't be replaced yet by AI. So we might have a more important role than ever before.
I agree on the color green being a really good one. But, it's one of the other panelists on the stage earlier today used the word taste. And that is exactly the right word. Like, you should be using LLMs for things that are tedious and rote and don't require taste. And that would be summarize 4 years of call transcripts. Like, no human wants to do that job. And it's a perfect thing for a generative model to work on, right? But the taste of, should I run this ad, or we've already got our fill of like the personalized, hyper-targeted stuff, but we need to do something tasteful. I think this is an example where these models and these technologies that are coming are going to be augmenting the human, not replacing the human. It's like a bicycle for your mind, to use the Steve Jobs expression.
I mean, just to go back to your other point, if you take those algorithms and run them ad nauseum, it tends to destroy your brand because you're not doing any protection. But at the same time, you can go back in these LLMs, you can actually reverse engineer how strong your brand is in the signal it's getting from these models. So you can go back and say, look at different cohorts, get the messaging about your brand from these different cohorts, and if it's very similar, it correlates to high brand strength. If it's very varied, you know your brand strength is low because you're getting a very varied signal. And so you can kind of tell how strong your brand is. And so if you tend to get varied by changing your messaging, which is going to happen in personalization. So you need to be able to protect that well.
It's almost like, to paraphrase or to quote Meatloaf, I would do anything for a sale, but I won't do that, right? You have to like find like where's your cutoff as a brand that you're not going to go, even if it's going to give you a little bit more lift because it's not necessarily what your brand is all about.
Right.
Wilfrid, I want to ask you, I think just pivoting a little bit, I know that we've seen so much AI-generated synthetic voice and a lot of interesting things that might be like, let's say, a little bit gray hat out there, and I think sometimes people get a little bit, they're a little bit worried, not necessarily people here in this conference, but the average consumer, that we're going to be going in the wrong place as an AI industry. Do you think that there need to be more regulatory or more guardrails, some association that just says we're not going to do certain things, we're not going to personalize off of particular data points, even if we get access to them?
Definitely. I think it's a great question. As one of my side things, I'm also part of Schmidt Futures, so Eric Schmidt's foundation, and we had a very long debates about exactly what you just mentioned. So I think it's a really important point, and I don't want to kind of shy away from it as someone who's also pushing on the personalization and all the great things we can do, all of the data we can look at and revise and use to revise our creative embodiment as humans. But I do agree with you. I do think there is some things that need to be done. I think one of the things that I think is the most important thing is that we need to be doing this on a global scale, right? I think that you cannot have like different nations having different rules for AI, and then we're all trying to work in one confinement in the UK, and then another confinement in the EU, and then another confinement in the US, and then another confinement in China. It has to be a global ruling of how are we going to mark and identify what is being created using AI. That needs to be digitally watermarked, which is very difficult, to say the least, especially when, if not all actors want to play on the same level playing field. So I think that's what makes it really difficult. I also think what makes it quite difficult as well is, for example, the malicious use, right? There's all sorts of positive uses that I can give you on the stage, right? From anything from translating to 1,000 languages and us being able to launch a campaign in 100 countries for a brand, with them just giving me one script in English. But there's also, on the other flip side, with any sort of technology, and I think we have to be honest with any sort of technology or any tool since the dawn of mankind, there's always going to be also some negatives. And I think the way we address that is a global framework. I think, two, is digital watermarking or some kind of messaging before this AI-generated content is made, like a disclaimer to let people know how this content is being generated. But I think it is difficult now, especially when we're all racing, to the next stages as businesses.
That's the thing, and know another thing that we discussed about off stage was just the very fact that things are moving so incredibly quickly. So how do you get world governments and major organizations all on the same page when the rate of adoption and acceleration is what it is right now?
I can take a shot at that. I think because we had a lot of debates about this, and I do think it is difficult with government, right? And I think this is where it's really hard for me to say as someone who studied computer science to say this, but I do think we need more people who study computer science but then also studied other subjects actually to really be more involved in government. Because I hear from, even if I take the example back home in the British Parliament, when you're hearing them speak about AI, it's very clear to me that they're not fully up to speed. Like when I'm hearing Parliament and the debates, I'm like, these are not people who per se have the knowledge of the models or how models work to even govern this. So they need more help and more assistance, or more people who study computer science who move into actually government advisory roles is actually where I think we have to go, because they're just not moving fast enough to your point, to keep up with some of these technological innovations. It's either that or we make some kind of body that all governments agree to basically listen and adhere to, which I think we'll probably be here for 100 years waiting for that.
So another UN, but just for AI.
Yeah, just for AI.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that before we move on?
I'm just reminded of Senator Ted Stevens from Alaska back a long time ago. The internet, it's not a truck, it's a series of tubes, Everyone remembers that. Like, it's still the same problem. It's a little bit of a different subject now, but it's a tough one for sure.
How about, I think one thing that's really interesting is that now you're living in a world where brands, obviously, they want to still be found. And search, even though Google is still dominant, now you have this interesting moment where people aren't quite sure if a brand is going to be found in 20 different places, in the near-term future, right? So how do you think that a brand needs to be thinking about optimizing its presence in a world where AI is curating brand results, and it could be doing it in a very, very different way? Michael, going full circle to our talk about interactions with ChatGPT and the like.
That is such an exciting area, and I think if I wanted to be at the forefront of marketing, I think that would be the area where I'd spend most of my time. And part of it is how you change what goes into the training corpus for the models, right? So it's kind of like the old search in that they're scraping the web and using that to build a data set that they do stuff with. So what can you do to influence that? And one of the most obvious things is like, well, what do you put on your own website? What are you writing about? And one of the things that my team has been working on actually is figuring out methods to test that over time. So we are going to all the major, generative search engines out there, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, all of them, and we just ask questions like, hey, who's the best insurance agent? Or what do you think about this or whatever? And you can do some metrics on those things that are pretty interesting, and some of the stuff you find is pretty shocking. Like there are some companies that, for whatever reason, the models really love. And I can't explain it yet at this point in time. I want to figure it out. But I think we're all going to have to move in that direction. And I was chatting with a friend this morning about this subject, and I think something that's kind of interesting and has some similarities with it is social media. And I think one of the things you've seen in social that happened maybe 5 or so years ago was people started doing this weird brand social media account thing. I like the Steakums account, actually. They're very philosophical, but they're selling a sandwich. But it's kind of a similar problem in the sense that you don't directly control what people are saying about you, so you have to figure out a way to kind of jump into it and be part of the mix. And that's a challenging problem for sure, but I think people need to think about, okay, what can we do in this area? Let's try some stuff, see what works. How can we influence these models when they're doing retrieval augmented generation? How do we influence the base training? It's a big problem.
It's such a cool opportunity. And my SEO team the other day brought it to me saying, look, Jen, Google's great and all that, but look at all these leads and opportunities we've gotten from GPT and Perplexity in the last month. And my SEO team said, look, this is where we need to start focusing. So if you're a marketer and you're in this audience, have your marketing team go and start thinking about how you as a person will search for something, whether it's a product or an experience or a problem you're trying to solve with business. But that's where that human element comes back in. We have to think about, it's not just keywords anymore. It's about how does a human ask the question? And we can't do that with AI alone. That's where that human energy and agility comes in to be able to capture that audience. But it seems like it's one of the biggest marketing opportunities right now.
Yeah, if you're a brand, I think the 3 things you need to do, one is increase your site for AI crawlability so that information can actually get into the LLMs. Second thing is you need to diversify your formats so that you're getting as much reach in different types of data sources that can actually be pulled in. And the third thing you need to do is probably start redefining your metrics, because you're kind of getting into an era of more like TV and billboard, where you can't actually do the one-to-one tracking of everything of where you're at, right?
So one of the things we've been looking at on my team, since we have some access, we host websites for some of our customers. It's one of our products. We can actually get some analysis out of looking at the CDN logs. And very helpfully, OpenAI has a little user agent, so you can do the analysis that says, oh, how many times did GPT bot look at my website? And then there's ChatGPT user. So am I influencing the base training of this model? Am I influencing its model of the world in language? Or am I in a context right now where someone is using ChatGPT and it just pulled in my site dynamically to render an answer? And looking at that stuff is fascinating. And one of the first things I would want to do is be like, well, what is it looking at the most? That would be really interesting to know.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. And I think another thing that you bring up, which is really interesting, and I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about this, but there are all these moments, such as like your social media account where Steakums has to, they're getting a lot of love today, but Steakums, by out of necessity, it is a one-to-many type of communication that they're putting out there. And they have a lot of information about their customers, and they have to personalize offers within reason while still staying true to that core brand identity that is present in their one-to-many communications, right? Because it would just be really weird if they spoke to me in a totally different way and I went to their X or Instagram and saw, wait a minute, this is not how you traditionally are. The brand starts to not necessarily stand for anything or have like core attributes. So I mean, can you as a marketer, do you think in the future you're going to be able to straddle that line and have that one-to-many voice, but also a hyper-personalized voice, if you will?
I think it goes back to, and I always say it still needs to be human-led. So I still, even with all these models, I think everyone said this today, like even with all these models, there still needs to be that human input. And I think that's what allows us to straddle both of those things, the hyper-targeting messages where you kind of creating these individual consumer profiles for your different clients. And then you're creating a personalization for that particular user while keeping your same brand message. But an AI by itself isn't going to be able, in its current form, to be able to do both at the same time without some human monitoring of that, I think. There needs to be some kind of human that is making sure that there's still, as you said, that messaging that is coherent and consistent with what you're already putting out there. But then I do think there is another layer where we can still do that hyper-personalized targeting based on that consumer profile. It's a bit like to give you an example, it's a bit like if I was to use like Hilton loyalty scheme, right? They will still know a lot of data points on you. They still have their brand messaging, but for you particularly, they know the rooms you kind of book, what kind of concierge trips you usually use. So that's where you can still hold the brand messaging, but then on the lower funnel stuff, you still have that information on the user that allows you to maybe target, but keep your same brand messaging.
You have something?
No, I was just thinking, like, as you split it, right, personalization works because you're kind of talking to a friend. But as you're kind of doing your broad brand messaging, your brand that really resonates gets a good signal. And so you have to kind of do both tracks at the same time to really get a powerful campaign going. Something that still says what your brand is while you're talking to the person like it's one-on-one, like a friend. And so AI can help kind of filter down your message into something for a person. You just have to make sure you have verifications and systems in place that actually make sure it's on brand for you.
I also think like really good brands have a voice that is the same on their website and their emails and their SMSs to you and every bit of communication with you. Like look at Patagonia. They're going to talk to you the same on the site as in their emails. It's a little dull, but maybe it'll get better. But it's genuinely the same. And so at Superside, what we did when we went through our rebrand, we created a Superside GPT. We basically taught it our brand voice. And Omar was talking about this a little bit when he was up here. But he was saying, look, like a brand's voice can be trained. These models are beyond trainable. So just train it, and you don't lose that authenticity no matter where you're marketing or what level you're speaking to.
That's a good point. I want to ask you all, since you're so in the loop, have you seen any, I think about like a lot of examples out there of like personalization gone wrong, right? Where part of my worry for marketers is they might accidentally learn the wrong lessons or do something that then drives personalization into the ground. Hopefully I'm wrong about that, but have you seen any interesting examples of foibles of like, just don't do that, even if you have the data, even if you have the contextual cues, it doesn't mean that you should necessarily tap that data.
I can guess. I personally haven't seen it. I don't know if you guys have.
I mean, I was thinking of really good examples, not actually of bad ones, but
really good ones too.
So Carvana launched a campaign
Yes.
like 2-3 years ago where they took their entire customer list and they generated like a 2-minute video that's like a historical memory. So it's like, Jen, you bought your Corvette in 2015, and this day, and this is what was happening through time. So it was like National Coffee Day, and it has the actual Corvette going through in like a whimsical, dreamlike scenario. And it was really good. And so they generated a pipeline, all these videos for, I forget, it was like 1.5 or 15 million customers that had ever bought a car with them. As like generative AI was just like starting. It was a really, really good example.
Another good example is my daughter's applying to colleges right now. She just got into San Diego State University, so props to San Diego State University. No, not for letting her in. I'm shocked they did. But they sent this incredible video to her that she opened it up, and it was like, welcome, Sabina. Well, like, you're now, they like had her name at the football games. They had it on like marquees and in classrooms, and it was so cool to be like, oh wow, as a kid, like I could really visualize myself there, and it shows they also took the time to personalize it, made like the other college admissions kind of feel crummy compared to what they were doing, because it was so cool.
You know, it kind of reminds me of Spotify Wrapped and the Apple's Photos app. Like, everyone's kind of in this ballpark a little bit, and it feels like there's a big chance to just bring it together a bit more. Like, people are already doing it, but I mean, Spotify Wrapped for your car, and then memories for the place you're about to go that haven't happened yet. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I think on the positive, I've definitely seen some really interesting campaigns with like using location, weather to make really personalized campaigns for brands. I thought that those are quite cool. On the negative, I think something that models still struggle with sometimes is actually brand names and their pronunciations. I think that's also interesting. And sometimes you have to like force them with like weird, typing in different ways to basically make sure it says the brand name correctly. I think the other thing I've seen some models struggle with is also people's names. And I think that's something that can get actually lost in personalization. If you don't get the person's name right, when you can personalize everything, but then you mispronounce their name, it's like it leaves them with a completely negative connotation with the brand. So I think those are some of the things I've seen. Obviously, I think the English model's really strong, but when I'm talking about like, sometimes when we're testing our Arabic models, German models, when we're trying to pronounce some of the names and some of the words, there's still some work there to be done.
And as you were saying that, I was thinking about B2B, and nothing better than getting dear brackets F name here. Have a fallback variable. Work on it, people.
Right.
So, and I know we have to wrap up in a few minutes. So I just want to ask you all, as you get ready to come back to stage in SF and HumanX 2026. What will be the next frontier with respect to AI marketing? What do you think are some things that are going to be interesting themes, tied to personalization over the next year? Any takes that I can hold you accountable for next year?
So I think there's two things. One is zero-touch marketing we've been talking about, right? How do people interact with AIs overall and get messaging when you can't connect directly to the customer? Second thing is testing brand messaging with synthetic users. So making entire cohorts, let's say 10,000, 20,000 different personas, seeing how they all react to your messaging, and then using that to kind of prioritize what you're going to build your campaigns around.
I'm going to say that I think agents are going to be the theme of the next year, and they haven't yet lived up to the hype. And I think that's because some of the essential marketplace things you need to make that work aren't in place yet. And with the iPhone, they came up with the idea of an app which has an icon, which is an opportunity for branding. And you say, this is a square, and it represents like Uber, and you go here, and you get a car. So it's pretty easy to imagine technically how you'd integrate like an API with an LLM, like ChatGPT, to do something like use Uber. But how is Uber going to actually make sure they're still branded in these new arenas that are coming up? And the market, I don't think, is developed yet. So there's an opportunity for people to say things like, I insist that when I implement my agent in Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, that it's going to be branded. Stuff like that, I think, is going to start to get hashed out over the next year.
I'm going to go back to the consumer experience and say I think that AI is going to become incredibly hyper-personalized for experiential. So you will be able to like upload a photo of your face, and a beauty company will be able to literally show you what these products will look like on you. Or same for clothes. Might be a little weird to upload pics of your body, but like imagine being able to try on an entire collection and know exactly how it's going to fit on you, not some super hot model. Like I think that that is going to be a really impressive way that AI can create experiences for shoppers.
I think two things. One, auto-optimizing creative. I think we have a lot of models where they are standalone. So if you have a voice model, video model, they stand alone, and then you have another model around the actual advertising and how people are perceiving it and interacting with it. I think we're going to have a lot of full circle models where they just basically reinforce learning of this is exactly what the user is actually resonating with, and then actually optimizing the creative for you, and then basically allowing you to do that for video, for audio, for banner. I've seen companies start to do it, but I think by next year we'll probably see that full circle. The other thing which is, I guess, it's got pros and cons, but I've seen it already in the wild, which is the AI influencers, the people of creating whole Instagram pages. This all started with like little Michaela, but now it's gone to a whole nother extreme where they look hyper realistic. There's still issues with the models. You can still see, like, especially with lip movement, the human eye, you can clearly see like there's still issues with models. But I do think we'll probably get there, and some brand will start creating loads of these kind of virtual influencers.
You guys were all surprised to find out that I was a hologram when we were talking backstage. Yeah. And I'll just throw one thing in there since we've got a second. But very quickly, I think that a lot of, and if I can almost assimilate all the different points that you made here, I think that a lot of marketers right now who might have a little bit of a trepidatiousness towards, giving the reins a little bit more towards AI and trusting AI to help them be better marketers. I think that there will be more trust in the year ahead, and people will just naturally realize that if I don't embrace this to some degree, I'm going to be in trouble and somebody will leapfrog me. So I think that these have been really fantastic lessons that I know everybody in the audience and at home is going to take to heart. So thank you all so much. This was really fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks for being
Thanks
here.
for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.